I'm Michael Carter, 38, and I thought I had the perfect marriage with Sarah, until I discovered the $250,000 she'd been hiding from me for 3 years. Finding that secret account was devastating enough, but when I traced where the money came from, I uncovered a betrayal so deep, it shattered everything I believed about our life together. The woman I trusted with my heart, my home, and my children had been living a lie that would cost her everything she held dear. What happened next would teach us both that some secrets have consequences you can never escape. If you've ever felt betrayed by the person you trusted most, stay with me. This story will show you that sometimes the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to freedom. It all started on a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of ordinary day that changes everything. I was searching through our home office for last year's tax documents when I found it. A bank statement wedged behind Sarah's wedding album, the one filled with photos of us looking so happy and in love 15 years ago. Sarah and I met in college, both studying business. She was ambitious, driven, everything I admired in a person. We married young, built what I thought was a solid partnership. 2 beautiful children followed. Emma, now 12, sharp as a whip and already showing signs of her mother's business acumen, and Jake, 9, gentle and artistic like me. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in suburbia, the American dream on a project manager's salary. I worked for a construction company, traveling occasionally for site inspections. Sarah had her real estate license and worked part-time, or so I thought, handling what she called select clients, while being available for the kids. Money had always been tight, or at least that's what Sarah constantly reminded me. Every month brought the same conversations about our budget, her sighs over grocery bills, her comments about other families who seemed to have it easier. She clipped coupons, insisted we buy generic brands, made me feel guilty about small purchases like coffee or lunch out with colleagues. "Michael, we need to be more careful," she'd say, reviewing our bank statements with a frown. The mortgage payment went up, Emma needs new school clothes, and Jake's soccer fees are due. We can barely make ends meet. I believed her. I trusted her completely. When she managed our finances, I felt grateful to have such a responsible partner. When she handled our tax preparations, I signed where she pointed without question. When she suggested I take that packed lunch instead of buying something at the work cafeteria, I did it gladly, thinking I was contributing to our family's financial stability. But holding that bank statement, staring at a balance of $251,147.32 in an account I'd never seen before, an account with both our names on it, but only her signature authority, everything I thought I knew about our life crumbled. The statement was dated just last month. The account had been active for over 3 years. Regular deposits, sometimes $5,000, sometimes $15,000, always round numbers that suggested this wasn't salary or commission from normal real estate transactions. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. While I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches and driving a 10-year-old Honda, $250,000 had been flowing through an account I didn't know existed. While Sarah complained about our tight budget and made me feel selfish for wanting to replace my worn-out work boots, she'd been accumulating wealth that could have changed our entire family's life. I sat in that chair for what felt like hours, wedding photos scattered around me, trying to reconcile the woman I'd married with the stranger who could hide this kind of secret. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. This was Sarah, the mother of my children, the woman who kissed me goodbye every morning, who planned our modest family vacations and reminded me to call in prescription refills. But this was also Sarah, who had somehow accumulated more money than I made in 4 years while letting me believe we were struggling financially. I couldn't confront Sarah immediately, not without understanding the full scope of what I'd discovered. That evening, after she'd gone to bed claiming exhaustion from a difficult client meeting, I returned to the office and began my investigation. The transaction records painted a disturbing picture. The first deposit had been made 3 years and 2 months ago, $8,500 on a Thursday in January. I remembered that week clearly because I'd been in Denver for a project review, stuck in meetings while a blizzard delayed my flight home. Sarah had texted me constantly, complaining about handling the kids alone, making me feel guilty for being away. Yet that same week, she'd deposited more money than I brought home in a month. The pattern became clear as I worked through the statements chronologically. Every deposit coincided with one of my business trips. When I was in Phoenix for a week in March, She deposited $12,000. During my 4-day conference in Chicago, another $15,000. The correlation was too precise to be coincidental. The transaction descriptions were vague and unhelpful. Professional services, consultation fee, commission payment, nothing that clearly identified the source, but the amounts were far beyond what any legitimate real estate transaction should have generated, especially for someone working part-time with select clients. I pulled up our joint checking account online to compare. While $250,000 flowed through Sarah's secret account, our family account showed a different story. My direct deposits from work, consistent and predictable. Occasional small transfers from Sarah labeled as real estate earnings, usually $800 to $1,500, amounts that seemed reasonable for part-time work. These modest contributions had been her explanation for any extra money, and they'd made me proud of her business acumen. But if she was earning enough to deposit $15,000 at a time in her secret account, why were her contributions to our household so small? Why were we living paycheck to paycheck while she sat on $250,000? I cross-referenced her deposits with our family calendar, the one where we tracked Emma's soccer games, Jake's piano lessons, and my travel schedule. The pattern held perfectly. Every major deposit happened when I was out of town. Every single one. My project manager mind went into overdrive, creating spreadsheets, tracking patterns, looking for explanations that might make this innocent. Maybe she was saving for a surprise, a dream house, a family vacation, the kids' college funds. Maybe she wanted to surprise me with financial security I'd never dreamed possible. But then why the secrecy? Why let me stress about money, count pennies, feel guilty about small purchases? Why maintain this elaborate charade of financial struggle while hoarding enough money to change our lives? I found another disturbing detail buried in the fine print. The account had been opened with a $50 initial deposit, but Sarah had added my name to it 6 months later, right? Around the time she'd started insisting I sign a power of attorney document that she claimed was for estate planning purposes. I'd signed it without question, trusting my wife completely. She'd covered her tracks well. But she'd also made one crucial mistake. Legally, this was a joint account. Whatever game she was playing, whatever secret she was keeping, that money belonged to both of us under the law. As I dug deeper into the bank's online portal, I found more accounts. A savings account with $18,000, a CD worth $25,000, even a small investment portfolio I'd never heard of. Sarah hadn't just been hiding money. She'd been building a financial empire while I worried about grocery bills. The numbers swam before my eyes as the full scope of her deception became clear. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about partnership, about the fundamental honesty that marriage requires. For 3 years, Sarah had been living a double life, and I'd been completely oblivious. But why? What could possibly justify this level of secrecy and deception? What was Sarah really doing during those client meetings? And why did her earnings coincide so perfectly with my business trips? I needed answers, but I knew confronting her without more information would only give her the opportunity to spin another story, create more lies. If there was more to discover, and my gut told me there was, I needed to find it before she realized what I knew. The next morning, Sarah left for what she called a property showing in the next county. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coffee, and headed out in her modest sedan, the same car she'd driven for 5 years, the one she'd refused to replace because we need to be practical about expenses. After dropping the kids at school, I made a decision that felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. I drove to her office. Sarah worked for Prestige Properties, a mid-sized real estate firm downtown. I'd been there exactly once at their Christmas party 2 years ago. The receptionist recognized me as Sarah's husband and chatted pleasantly while I waited, supposedly to surprise my wife with lunch. "Oh, she's not in today," the young woman said. "She rarely works from the office anymore. Most of her business is referral-based now, very high-end stuff. She's probably out at another one of those luxury showings." Luxury showings. Sarah had never mentioned luxury properties. Her stories were always about modest homes, first-time buyers, people just like us trying to make their dreams come true. I thanked the receptionist and left, my mind racing. If Sarah wasn't at a showing and wasn't at her office, where was she? That afternoon, after picking up the kids and getting them settled with homework, I made another decision that felt like betrayal but necessary for truth. I searched Sarah's car. What I found changed everything. Hidden in her glove compartment, beneath registration papers and insurance documents, was a receipt from the Meridian Hotel, a 5-star establishment downtown. The charge was for $847 for a deluxe suite, on a night last month when Sarah had supposedly been at a late client dinner. The receipt was detailed. Room service charges for champagne and oysters, spa services, valet parking. My hands trembled as I found more receipts. Expensive restaurants where entrees cost more than our weekly grocery budget. A jewelry store purchase for $3,200. A bracelet I'd never seen Sarah wear. Boutique shopping receipts for designer clothes that weren't hanging in our shared closet. But the most damning discovery was hidden in the zippered compartment of her purse. A second phone. It was a newer iPhone, sleek and expensive. When I powered it on, it didn't ask for a passcode. Sarah had disabled that security feature, perhaps for convenience. The home screen showed dozens of unread messages, missed calls, and apps I didn't recognize. I opened the messages with shaking hands. The most recent conversation was with someone labeled simply D with a heart emoji. The messages painted a picture that made me physically nauseous. Missing you already, beautiful. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you Thursday. I booked the usual suite. You looked stunning in that red dress. When can I see you wear it again? Or better yet, not wear it? The messages went back months. Intimate, sexual, romantic. Everything a married woman shouldn't be exchanging with someone who wasn't her husband. But it got worse. The Henderson property closed today. Your commission will be substantial. $18,000 after my cut. We make such a good team, don't we? Michael suspects nothing. Good. We need to be more careful until we can be together openly. I love you, Sarah. Soon we won't have to hide anymore. I scrolled through dozens of these exchanges, each one a dagger to my heart. Sarah wasn't just cheating. She was planning a future with this person while living a lie with me. But the financial messages revealed something even more sinister. References to inflated appraisals, adjusted comps, and cooperative inspectors suggested. This wasn't just an affair, it was a business partnership built on fraud. The Miller House. Appraisal came in at $750K like we discussed. Buyer never suspected it's worth $650K max. Easy $100K profit to split. Your inspector friend is worth every penny we pay him. Another clean report on a house that should have failed. My wife wasn't just unfaithful, she was a criminal. The woman I trusted to raise our children, to build our future, was systematically defrauding homebuyers while carrying on an affair with her partner in crime. I took photos of every relevant message, every receipt, every piece of evidence. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone steady, but I documented everything. Whatever happened next, I needed proof of what I'd discovered. The Sarah I thought I married, the careful budgeter, the devoted mother, the faithful wife, was a complete fabrication. The real Sarah was living a luxury lifestyle funded by fraud while letting me believe we were struggling financially. As I carefully returned everything to its place, one thought echoed in my mind. How many innocent families had been victimized by Sarah's greed? How many people had overpaid for homes because of her fraudulent schemes? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? That evening, while Sarah helped Emma with math homework and listened to Jake practice piano, I retreated to my office under the guise of catching up on work emails. Instead, I began investigating the names and properties mentioned in her text messages. The Henderson property she'd referenced was easy to find in public records. A colonial-style home that had sold 6 months ago for $680,000 to a young couple named Jennifer and Mark Henderson. The listing agent was Sarah Carter, my wife. But when I cross-referenced the sale price with recent comparable properties in that neighborhood, something was clearly wrong. Similar homes on the same street had sold for $580,000 to $620,000. The Henderson house, according to public records, had significant foundation issues noted in a previous inspection report from 2 years earlier. Yet somehow it had sold for $680,000 with a clean inspection. I dug deeper into Sarah's recent transactions, using the real estate database my construction background gave me access to. What I found was a pattern of systematic fraud that made my stomach turn. The Miller house from the text messages had indeed sold for $750,000 public. Records showed it was built in 1987 and hadn't been updated since 2003. Comparable homes in that development were selling for $625,000 to $650,000 maximum. But Sarah's buyer, a relocating executive named David Miller, had paid full asking price with no negotiation. Property after property showed the same pattern. Inflated appraisals, buyers who seemed to accept overpriced homes without question, inspection reports that glossed over significant issues. Sarah had been systematically targeting buyers who trusted her expertise, often people relocating from out of state who didn't know the local market. Then I found the connection that made everything click into place. The name D from Sarah's phone wasn't just her affair partner. It was David Morrison, owner of Morrison Development Group. His company had developed 3 of the subdivisions where Sarah had been most active. More significantly, Morrison Development had been the contractor for the renovations that justified the inflated prices on many of the homes Sarah sold. The scam was elegant in its simplicity. Morrison would identify properties with potential, perform minimal renovations while inflating the costs on paper, then have Sarah market them at prices far above their actual value. Her charm and sales skills would convince buyers to pay premium prices for homes that weren't worth half what they paid. Morrison got his development profits. Sarah got massive commissions, and innocent families got stuck with overpriced homes that would never appreciate to match what they'd invested. But it went even deeper. I found a real estate contract that made my blood boil. The buyers were a military family. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and his wife relocating to our area for his new assignment. They'd trusted Sarah completely, paying $620,000 for a house that comparable sales data showed was worth $480,000 at most. These weren't wealthy investors who could afford the loss. These were working families, young couples, people who'd saved for years to buy their first homes. Sarah and Morrison were stealing their futures, one fraudulent transaction at a time. The financial records I'd found earlier now made perfect sense. Sarah's deposits weren't just commissions, they were her cut of the overpayments. If a house sold for $100,000 more than its actual value, Sarah and Morrison would split that excess profit. The commission she reported to our household budget was just the legitimate portion of her earnings. I found 17 properties over the past 3 years that showed clear evidence of the scheme. Conservative calculations suggested buyers had been overcharged by more than $1.2 million total. Sarah's share would be around $600,000. But she'd been careful to hide most of it in various accounts and investments. The woman sleeping next to me every night, the mother reading bedtime stories to our children, was a predator who targeted families just like ours. The irony was suffocating. While she complained about our tight budget and made me feel guilty about small expenses, she was stealing hundreds of thousands from people who trusted her. But David Morrison wasn't just her business partner. The messages made it clear they were planning a life together. References to when we can be together openly, and Michael suspects nothing, painted a picture of a woman who viewed her marriage as a temporary inconvenience. I was just her cover story, the unsuspecting husband who provided legitimacy while she built her real life with someone else. I couldn't handle this alone anymore. The weight of Sarah's betrayal, financial, emotional, and moral, was crushing me. But more than that, I needed professional guidance to protect my children and ensure that justice was served properly. After 3 sleepless nights of wrestling with the evidence I'd gathered, I made an appointment with Hamilton Investigations, a private firm recommended by a colleague who'd used them during his own difficult divorce. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but I couldn't move forward, based on stolen glimpses of text messages and bank statements I wasn't supposed to see. Marcus Hamilton was a former police detective in his 50s, with the kind of steady demeanor that inspired confidence. I laid out everything I'd discovered: the hidden bank accounts, the fraudulent real estate schemes, the affair with David Morrison. "Mr. Carter," he said after reviewing my evidence, "what you've uncovered appears to be wire fraud, real estate fraud, and conspiracy. These are federal crimes. Are you prepared for where this might lead?" The question hung in the air. Was I prepared to see my children's mother face criminal charges? Was I ready to destroy the only family structure Emma and Jake had ever known? But then I thought about the Rodriguez family, about all the innocent buyers who'd been victimized. "She's hurt a lot of people," I said finally. "It has to stop." Hamilton nodded. "I'll need 2 weeks to gather admissible evidence. Professional surveillance, financial forensics, documented proof of the fraudulent activities. What you found is compelling, but we need everything to be legally bulletproof. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal, kiss Sarah goodbye each morning, help the kids with homework, maintain the facade of our happy family while knowing it was all built on lies. Sarah seemed more distant than usual, taking phone calls in private, spending longer hours away from home. Twice she came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. Once I noticed she was wearing the $3,200 bracelet I'd seen on the receipt, but when I complimented it, she claimed it was costume jewelry from a thrift store. The lies came so easily to her. That realization hurt almost as much as the affair itself. Hamilton's report arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered to my office in a sealed envelope marked confidential. Inside were photographs, financial records, recorded conversations, and documented proof of everything I'd suspected and more. Sarah and David Morrison had been conducting their affair for over 2 years, not just the months I'd seen in text messages. They met regularly at luxury hotels, traveled together on business trips, while I thought Sarah was attending real estate conferences. The surveillance photos showed them holding hands, kissing, acting like a couple completely comfortable in their relationship. But the financial fraud was even more extensive than I'd realized. Hamilton's forensic accountant had identified 23 properties where buyers had been systematically overcharged. The total amount of theft exceeded $1.5 million, with Sarah's share approaching $750,000 when all accounts were included. Most damning of all were the recorded conversations Hamilton had captured. Sarah and Morrison discussing specific buyers, mocking their trust, calculating how much they could steal without arousing suspicion. They talked about these families like marks in a con game, not human beings whose lives they were destroying. In one particularly chilling exchange, Morrison had asked if Sarah felt guilty about the military family they'd recently defrauded. Her response haunts me still. They're military. They'll get stationed somewhere else in a few years anyway. By the time they figure out what the house is really worth, we'll be long gone. The report concluded with Hamilton's professional assessment. Subject demonstrates no remorse for criminal activity and appears to be planning permanent relocation with co-conspirator Morrison. Recommend immediate action to secure evidence and protect clients' interests. Sarah wasn't just stealing money. She was planning to disappear with it, leaving me and our children behind like discarded props in her elaborate performance. That night, as I watched her help Jake with his science project, laughing at his questions about volcanoes, I made my decision. The woman I'd married might be gone, but I still had 2 children who deserve protection, truth, and a future built on something more solid than their mother's lies. Armed with Hamilton's professional investigation, I knew I had to act quickly. The report had revealed something that chilled me to the bone. Sarah and Morrison were planning to disappear together within the next 6 months. Text messages Hamilton had intercepted showed them discussing exit strategies and starting fresh somewhere. They weren't just planning to continue their affair openly. They were planning to vanish with their stolen money, leaving behind the victims they'd defrauded and the family Sarah had been using as cover. That Friday evening, while Sarah attended what she claimed was a real estate networking dinner, I implemented a plan I'd been developing for weeks. I drove to our bank and used the joint account access I'd discovered to transfer the entire $251,147.32 to a new account I'd opened that morning, an account specifically designated as a trust fund for Emma and Jake's future education. Legally, I had every right to access those funds. The account was in both our names, and I'd consulted with the attorney to ensure I wasn't breaking any laws. Morally, I felt justified redirecting money that had been stolen from innocent families towards securing my children's future. But I didn't stop there. Hamilton's investigation had uncovered 3 additional accounts Sarah had been hiding, plus the investment portfolio I'd found earlier. Every account that bore my name as a joint holder I emptied. Every account that was solely in Sarah's name, I documented and photographed for future legal proceedings. The USB drive I created that night contained everything: bank statements, transaction records, property documents, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, and a detailed timeline of Sarah's criminal activities spanning 3 years. I made multiple copies, storing them in different locations: my office safe, a safety deposit box, and with my attorney. As I worked through the financial records, I discovered something that made my hands shake with rage. Sarah had been stealing from us too. Over the past year, she'd been taking money from our joint household account, small amounts, $200 here, $300 there, claiming they were for unexpected expenses or the kids' activities. I'd trusted her completely, never questioning where the money went. Now I knew. Those small thefts had funded her luxury lifestyle with Morrison. The $300 she'd claimed was for Jake's new soccer cleats had actually paid for champagne at their hotel meetings. The $450 she'd said was needed for Emma's school supplies had purchased lingerie I'd never seen her wear. Every lie felt like a physical blow. The woman I'd been married to for 15 years had been methodically dismantling our life while building a new one with someone else. But the most devastating discovery came in a folder hidden deep in her computer. Files, a document titled Exit Plan. It outlined Sarah's strategy for leaving our marriage with maximum financial gain and minimum legal consequences. She'd been planning this for over a year. The document was clinical in its calculation. She'd researched divorce laws, calculated potential alimony payments, and even consulted with an attorney about hiding assets. Most chillingly, she'd written detailed notes about making me appear unstable or unfit for custody. Should I discover her plans and fight back, Michael's travel schedule will work in my favor, can claim he's absent and uninvolved with the children. His tendency toward depression after his father's death could be emphasized. Need to document instances of concerning behavior to support custody arguments. She'd been collecting ammunition to use against me, preparing to destroy my reputation and steal my children along with everything else. The final section of the document outlined her future with Morrison. They'd chosen Costa Rica as their destination, a country with limited extradition treaties and a friendly atmosphere for American expatriates with questionable pasts. They'd already begun transferring money to offshore accounts, planning to liquidate their remaining assets and disappear before anyone could uncover their crimes. Sarah had never intended to face consequences for her actions. She'd planned to vanish, leaving behind the families she'd defrauded, the husband she'd betrayed, and the children she'd claimed to love. But now I had everything. Every bank record, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of evidence needed to stop her plan and protect everyone she'd victimized. The USB drive in my hands contained the power to destroy the elaborate lie Sarah had constructed and ensure that justice would finally be served. The woman sleeping in our bed was a stranger, a predator, who'd been using our home as her base of operations while planning to abandon everything we'd built together. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the man she'd married, the father who would do anything to protect his children. Jennifer Walsh's law office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. She came highly recommended as one of the state's most skilled family law attorneys, with a particular expertise in complex divorce cases involving fraud and hidden assets. "Mr. Carter," she said, settling behind her mahogany desk with the USB drive I'd provided, "I've reviewed the evidence you've compiled. What your wife has done goes far beyond marital infidelity. We're looking at wire fraud, real estate fraud, conspiracy and money laundering, federal crimes that could result in significant prison time." The words hung heavy in the air. Prison time. "For Sarah, the mother of my children," Walsh continued, her tone professional but compassionate. "However, this also puts you in an advantageous position for divorce proceedings. Courts don't look favorably on criminal activity, especially when it involves defrauding innocent families while hiding assets from a spouse." She walked me through the legal landscape I was entering. In our state, marital assets discovered during divorce proceedings must be disclosed completely. Sarah's hidden accounts, even those she'd funded through criminal activity, would be subject to division. But because she'd concealed them deliberately, while forcing our family to live on restricted means, the judge would likely award me a disproportionate share. "The $250,000 you transferred to the Children's Education Fund was legally permissible," Walsh explained. "As a joint account holder, you had every right to access those funds. More importantly, given the criminal source of that money, establishing it as a trust for your children's legitimate needs demonstrates responsible stewardship rather than vindictive behavior." We discussed custody arrangements extensively. Emma and Jake's welfare was my primary concern, but I feared how criminal charges against their mother would affect them psychologically. Walsh had handled similar cases and offered realistic guidance. "Children are remarkably resilient, but they need stability and truth appropriate to their age level," she said. Courts prioritize the children's best interests, and a parent engaged in criminal activity while planning to flee the country raises serious questions about fitness for custody. The evidence Hamilton had gathered would support a request for emergency, temporary custody if Sarah showed signs of attempting to leave with the children. The exit plan document, with its calculated strategy for making me appear unfit, would actually work in my favor by demonstrating her manipulative intentions. Walsh outlined the timeline we faced. Filing for divorce would trigger mandatory disclosure requirements that would force Sarah to reveal all her assets, including the accounts she thought I knew nothing about. If she lied on those forms, it would constitute perjury and strengthen our case further. But there was another dimension to consider: the federal investigation that would inevitably follow once I reported the real estate fraud. The FBI's Economic Crimes Unit would want to pursue charges against both Sarah and Morrison, not just for the money they'd stolen, but to protect future victims and recover assets for the families they'd defrauded. "Mr. Carter, I need you to understand something," Walsh said, leaning forward with serious intensity. "Once we file these papers and contact federal authorities, there's no going back. Your wife will likely face federal charges, possible prison time, and complete financial ruin. Your children will have to live with knowing their mother is a convicted felon. Are you prepared for that reality?" The question forced me to confront the full magnitude of what I was setting in motion. Was I prepared to destroy Emma and Jake's perception of their mother? Was I ready to be a single parent while Sarah faced the consequences of her crimes? But then I thought about the Rodriguez family, about all the other victims whose trust Sarah had exploited. I thought about her exit plan, her calculated strategy to abandon our children while painting me as an unfit father. I thought about the years of lies, the elaborate deception that had turned our entire marriage into a fraud. "She made her choices," I said finally. "I'm just making sure there are consequences." Walsh nodded approvingly. "Then let's begin. I'll prepare the divorce filing, petition for emergency custody protection, and coordinate with federal authorities. Given the evidence you've provided, I'm confident we can protect your children's interests and ensure your wife faces appropriate consequences for her crimes." As I left her office that afternoon, I carried a thick folder containing the legal documents that would reshape our family's future. The point of no return was approaching rapidly, but I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. Sarah had spent 3 years building an elaborate lie. Now it was time for the truth. That weekend, while Sarah attended another mysterious client meeting, I found myself really observing my children for the first time in months. Emma, at 12, had always been perceptive beyond her years, but I'd been so consumed with my own discoveries that I'd missed signs she'd been picking up on the tension at home. It started with a simple question while we prepared lunch together. "Dad, why does Mom have 2 phones?" I nearly dropped the sandwich I was making. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "She has her regular phone, but sometimes I see her using a different one. She puts it away really fast when anyone comes in the room." Emma's voice carried the careful tone children use when they're testing whether adults will tell them the truth. "And she gets text messages on it that make her smile in a way that's different." My heart broke for my daughter, who'd been carrying these observations alone. How long had she been noticing things that didn't make sense? How much had she already figured out? "Sometimes I hear her talking to someone late at night when you're traveling," Emma continued, her voice smaller now. "She uses a different voice, softer, like when she talks to you, but happier." I sat down beside her, trying to find words that would acknowledge her intelligence without burdening her with adult problems. "You're very observant, Emma. Has this been worrying you?" She nodded, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" The direct question hit me like a physical blow. Children see so much more than we give them credit for. Emma had been living with the same tension I'd been feeling, but without the context to understand what it meant. "I don't know yet, honey," I said honestly. "But I want you to know that whatever happens between your mom and me, it's not your fault, and it doesn't change how much we both love you and Jake." Later that afternoon, while Emma was at soccer practice, I had a different kind of conversation with Jake. At 9, he was more focused on his immediate world, his art projects, his friends, the goldfish he'd named Picasso. But even he had noticed changes. "Mom's been sad lately," he said while working on a watercolor painting. "Not regular sad, like when she has a headache. different sad. Like she's thinking about something that makes her feel bad, out of the mouths of babes. Jake had picked up on Sarah's guilt, the internal conflict she must be experiencing as she maintained her double life while planning her eventual escape. That evening, I made a discovery that changed everything about how I viewed Sarah's relationship with our children. While she was in the shower, I noticed she'd left her regular phone on the kitchen counter, the one our family knew about. A text message notification was visible on the screen. It was from Emma, sent earlier that day. "Mom, can we talk when you get home? I've been worried about some stuff." Sarah's response was brief and dismissive. "Busy tonight, honey. We'll talk later." But checking the timestamps, I realized later had never come. Sarah had spent the evening on her secret phone, texting with Morrison, while our daughter waited for a conversation that never happened. I found Emma's journal that night. Not to invade her privacy, but because she'd left it open on her desk with a note asking me to read it. The entry was dated 3 days earlier. "I think Mum is keeping secrets from Dad. She acts different when he's not home, and she's always on her phone texting someone. She bought new clothes that she hides in the back of her closet, and sometimes she smells like cologne that isn't Dad's. I'm scared that if I tell Dad what I notice, it will make everything worse. But I'm also scared that if I don't tell him, something bad will happen to our family. I wish adults would just tell kids the truth, instead of pretending everything is fine when it's not." My 12-year-old daughter had been carrying this burden alone, trying to protect both her parents while feeling responsible for holding our family together. The guilt I felt was overwhelming. That night I made a decision that would guide everything that followed. Whatever happened with Sarah, whatever legal battles or criminal charges lay ahead, I would not let my children navigate this crisis without truth, support, and stability. They deserved better than the elaborate lie their mother had been living. They deserved a parent who would be honest with them, age-appropriately, about what was happening and why. Most importantly, they deserved to know that none of this was their fault, and that they would be protected and loved regardless of the choices their mother had made. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything seem possible. Sarah left for what she claimed was an early appointment with new clients, kissing me goodbye with the same routine affection she'd shown for years. But now I knew it was all performance. After dropping the kids at school, I drove to First National Bank with a folder containing all the legal documentation Jennifer Walsh had prepared. The bank authorization forms were comprehensive, establishing my legal right to access all jointly held accounts and creating an irrevocable educational trust for Emma and Jake. Margaret Stevens, the branch manager, reviewed my documents with the thoroughness I'd hoped for. "Mr. Carter, I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. Once we transfer these funds into an educational trust, they can only be used for your children's legitimate educational expenses. Tuition, books, room and board, things like that. That's exactly what I want," I replied. "This money should benefit Emma and Jake's future, not fund anyone's secret lifestyle." The process took nearly 2 hours. We transferred $251,847.32 from Sarah's secret account, plus $18,000 from the savings account and $25,000 from the certificate of deposit I'd discovered. The investment portfolio, worth another $37,000, would require separate paperwork, but could be liquidated and added to the trust within the week. Margaret was professional but curious. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, your wife will receive notification of these transactions within 24 hours. Are you prepared for that conversation?" I smiled grimly. "Yes, I am." As we completed the final paperwork, I felt a satisfaction that surprised me. For 3 years, Sarah had been accumulating wealth stolen from innocent families, while making me feel guilty about buying coffee or replacing worn-out shoes. She'd manipulated our budget, hidden her true income, and forced our family to live beneath our means while she enjoyed luxury with her lover. Now that money, every dollar of it, was locked away for Emma and Jake's education. Sarah couldn't access it, couldn't spend it on hotel rooms or jewelry, couldn't use it to fund her planned escape with Morrison. The children she'd been prepared to abandon would benefit from the only good thing to come from her criminal activities. But I wasn't finished. Hamilton's investigation had uncovered a crucial detail about Sarah's operation. She'd been remarkably careless about paper trails. The woman who'd been so careful to hide her activities from me had left a clear financial record for investigators to follow. That afternoon, I visited 2 more banks, where Sarah had established accounts using her maiden name and social security number. At First Citizens Bank, I found another $32,000 in an account labeled S. Morrison Business Fund. The name choice was telling. She was already thinking of herself as Sarah Morrison, planning her new identity with David. At Central Trust, I discovered the most damaging evidence yet, a series of wire transfers totaling $85,000 sent to a bank in the Cayman Islands. International money laundering to accompany the domestic fraud. Each discovery strengthened my legal position, but deepened my understanding of how completely Sarah had betrayed not just me, but our entire family. She'd been living a double life so comprehensive that I wondered if she even remembered who she used to be before the lies took over. That evening, Sarah came home later than usual, claiming her clients had taken her out for a celebration dinner. She was wearing the expensive bracelet again and seemed unusually cheerful. "Great news, honey," she said, kissing my cheek with what felt like genuine warmth. "I closed a huge deal today. We might actually be able to take that vacation to Disney World you've been wanting to plan with the kids." The casual cruelty of the lie took my breath away. There was no huge deal, at least not any legitimate transaction. Sarah had probably just received another payment from Morrison for defrauding another innocent family, and she was celebrating by offering me crumbs from her stolen feast. But her cheerful mood wouldn't last long. Somewhere in the bank's computer system, notifications were being generated. By morning, Sarah would discover that her carefully accumulated nest egg had vanished into an account she couldn't access, controlled by trustees who would ensure it served its proper purpose. I went to bed that night with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in months. Tomorrow, the elaborate performance Sarah had been maintaining would begin to crumble. The woman who'd stolen from innocent families, betrayed her marriage and planned to abandon her children, was about to learn that actions have consequences. The money she'd hidden from me was now hidden from her, permanently secured for the future of the children she'd been prepared to leave behind. Sarah's phone rang at 9:23 a.m. on Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee, watching her face as she answered what I knew would be the call from First National Bank. "This is Sarah Carter," she said, her voice bright with the false cheerfulness she'd perfected over years of deception. But within seconds her expression changed. The color drained from her face, and her hand began to tremble as she gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean the account is closed? That's impossible." "I just checked the balance yesterday." She paused, listening, and I saw the exact moment when reality hit her. "My husband did what?" She hung up without another word, and immediately began frantically dialing another number. Probably the savings account bank, then another. With each call, her panic grew more visible, her voice more desperate. "Michael," she said finally, turning to face me with barely controlled hysteria. "We need to talk. Right now." I set down my coffee cup and looked at her calmly. "Yes, Sarah, I think we do. What have you done with our money?" The possessive pronoun was telling. Even in crisis, she couldn't acknowledge that the money had been stolen from innocent families. To her, it was still ours. "I secured our children's educational future," I said quietly. "Something you should have done instead of hiding assets while making our family live paycheck to paycheck." Sarah's mask began to slip completely. "You don't understand. That money isn't what you think it is. I can explain everything. Can you explain David Morrison?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward, catching herself against the kitchen counter. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. "How do you—" She stopped herself, but it was too late. The admission was written all over her face. "I know about the affair, Sarah. I know about the fraudulent real estate deals. I know about the families you've been cheating, the money you've been hiding, and the plan to disappear with Morrison to Costa Rica." Each revelation struck her like another blow. She opened her mouth several times without speaking, her carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. "You've been reading my private messages," she said finally, grasping for some moral high ground. "That's a violation of my privacy, Michael." "You had no right—" "I had every right," I interrupted, my voice harder than I'd intended. "I'm your husband. I'm the father of your children. I had the right to know that the woman I trusted was systematically destroying innocent families while planning to abandon her own." Sarah tried a different approach, her voice becoming softer, more manipulative. "Michael, please. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The real estate market is so competitive, and we needed the money. Everything I did was for our family." "For our family?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. You made me eat packed lunches while you spent thousands on hotel rooms with your lover. You let me feel guilty about buying coffee while you wore jewelry worth more than our mortgage payment. You complained about our tight budget while sitting on $250,000. Her face hardened as she realized manipulation wouldn't work. Fine, yes, I had an affair. Yes, I made some questionable business decisions. But that doesn't give you the right to steal money from our accounts. Questionable business decisions? I pulled out my phone and began reading from Hamilton's report. The Rodriguez family, he's a staff sergeant, she's a nurse. They trusted you to help them buy their first home. You convinced them to pay $620,000 for a house worth $480,000. They're now underwater on a mortgage they'll never recover from. Sarah's jaw tightened. Real estate is a business, Michael. Sometimes people pay more than the Henderson family, I continued. Young couple expecting their first child. You sold them a house with foundation problems that your inspector friend overlooked. They've already spent $30,000 on repairs that should have been disclosed. Stop, Sarah said. But I kept reading. The Miller family, the Patterson family, the Brooks family. 17 families total. Sarah, 17 families whose trust you exploited, whose futures you damaged, so you could fund your affair and plan your escape. She was silent for a long moment, staring at the floor. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes, not guilt or remorse, but anger. I never loved you, Michael, she said with cold precision. I married you because you were safe, reliable, the kind of man who would never question or suspect. You were supposed to be my cover story while I built something real with someone who actually understands me. The words should have hurt, but instead I felt a strange sense of relief. The woman I'd thought I'd married, the Sarah I'd been mourning, had never really existed. Where's the money, Michael? She demanded. I need access to those accounts. The money is exactly where it belongs, I said. In a trust fund for Emma and Jake's education. Money stolen from other families' children will now secure our children's future. The children you were planning to abandon. Sarah's composure finally shattered completely. You can't do this to me. That money is mine. I earned it. I worked for it. You stole it, I said simply. And now there are going to be consequences. The sound she made was almost animalistic. Rage and desperation combined. But as I looked at her, I realized I felt nothing but pity. This was what happened when someone built their entire life on lies. Eventually the truth caught up, and there was nowhere left to hide. The next 48 hours revealed the true depths of Sarah's desperation. After our confrontation on Tuesday morning, she'd stormed out of the house, claiming she needed time to think. But her actions showed she was doing anything but thinking clearly. Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from Emma's school. Sarah had arrived during lunch, demanding to check Emma out early for a family emergency. When the office asked for details, Sarah became agitated and claimed I was having a breakdown and that she needed to protect the children. Fortunately, I'd anticipated this possibility. Jennifer Walsh had advised me to contact both schools and provide them with documentation of our custody situation. The school administrator, Mrs. Henderson, calmly explained to Sarah that both parents needed to be present for any early dismissals during a pending divorce proceeding. Sarah's response was telling. According to Mrs. Henderson, she'd become increasingly frantic, insisting that I was dangerous and unstable, that the children weren't safe with me. When the school refused to release Emma without my consent, Sarah had accused them of enabling an abusive father. The irony was staggering. The woman who'd been systematically defrauding innocent families while planning to abandon her own children was now trying to paint me as the danger they needed protection from. That evening, Sarah returned home with red, swollen eyes and a desperate energy that made me genuinely concerned for everyone's safety. She immediately cornered Emma in the living room. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice artificially sweet, "Daddy and I are having some grown-up problems. If anything happens, if Daddy starts acting scary or mean, I want you to call me right away, okay?" Emma looked confused and frightened. "What kind of scary, Mom?" "Just different. If he says things that don't make sense or if he seems angry all the time, can you promise to call me?" I intervened before Sarah could plant more seeds of fear in our daughter's mind. "Emma, honey, why don't you go upstairs and get ready for bed? Mom and I need to finish our conversation." After Emma left, I confronted Sarah directly. "You will not use our children as weapons in this situation. They're scared and confused enough without you trying to turn them against me." "Turn them against you?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and desperate. Michael, you've destroyed our family. You've stolen money that could have given Emma and Jake opportunities you can't even imagine. I've protected them, I said firmly, from a mother who was prepared to abandon them, from money stolen from other families, from a future built on fraud and lies. That's when she played her final, most desperate card. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. For a moment I couldn't process what she'd said. What? I'm pregnant, Michael. 8 weeks. It's yours. Her voice carried a strange mixture of triumph and desperation. Now do you understand why we need that money? Why we need to work this out? But even as she spoke, I could see the lie in her eyes. 8 weeks would put conception right around the time Hamilton's surveillance had documented her most intensive period with Morrison. The timing was too convenient. The claim too perfectly calculated to manipulate my emotions. Sarah, I said quietly, even if that were true, and we both know it isn't, it wouldn't change what you've done. It wouldn't make the fraud disappear or the affair acceptable. It wouldn't give you the right to abandon Emma and Jake for a new life with Morrison. Her face crumpled as she realized her last manipulation had failed. You don't believe me. I don't believe anything you say anymore, I replied honestly. You've lied about everything else for 3 years. Why would this be different? That night, Sarah made her most desperate move yet. At 2:17 a.m. I woke to find her in our bedroom, frantically packing clothes into suitcases. What are you doing? We're leaving, she said without looking up. All of us tonight. We'll go to my sister's in Phoenix, figure things out away from here. Sarah, you can't take the children anywhere without a court order. You know that. She spun around, her eyes wild. Watch me. They're my children too, Michael. I have rights. I reached for my phone. Jennifer Walsh explained your rights to me very clearly. You have the right to supervised visitation pending the custody hearing. You don't have the right to take them out of state during a divorce proceeding. You're calling your lawyer? Her voice rose to near hysteria. At 2 in the morning? I'm calling the police, I said calmly, to document your attempt to violate the custody agreement. The threat stopped her cold. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, suitcases half packed around her, the reality of her situation finally sinking in completely. She'd lost the money. She'd lost control of the situation. She'd lost any moral authority as a parent, and now she was on the verge of losing her children entirely through her own desperate actions. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in her eyes, but it was too late for remorse. The time for truth and accountability had arrived. The call I'd been expecting came on Friday morning. Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's Economics A. Crimes Unit wanted to meet immediately to discuss the evidence I'd provided regarding Morrison Development Group and the systematic real estate fraud. Operation Mr. Carter, she said as we sat in her downtown office. Your wife and David Morrison have been on our radar for 6 months. Your evidence provides the final pieces we needed to move forward with federal charges. The FBI had been investigating Morrison independently after receiving complaints from 3 separate families who discovered they'd overpaid significantly for properties in his developments. But proving coordination between Morrison and specific real estate agents had been challenging until Hamilton's surveillance, and my financial documentation provided the smoking gun. We're executing search warrants this afternoon, Agent Torres continued. Morrison's offices, his personal residence, and his development sites. We'll also be freezing all accounts associated with Morrison Development Group. The implications were staggering. Morrison's entire business empire was about to collapse, taking with it any hope Sarah had of continuing their partnership or disappearing together with stolen money. But Agent Torres had more disturbing news. Mr. Carter, we believe your wife and Morrison have been operating this scheme in multiple states. We've identified similar patterns of fraudulent sales in Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado. The total amount of theft may exceed $3 million. $3 million. Dozens of families. A criminal enterprise that had been growing more sophisticated and brazen over time. Sarah hadn't just been a wayward spouse having an affair. She'd been a key player in an interstate fraud operation. Your wife is facing federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, Agent Torres explained. Given the scope and duration of the criminal activity, she's looking at potential prison time of 15 to 20 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. Emma and Jake would be adults before their mother could even be considered for parole. The woman who'd tucked them into bed, helped with homework, attended school events, was about to become a federal criminal. That afternoon, from my office window, I watched the news unfold on television. FBI agents in windbreakers, carrying boxes from Morrison Development Group's headquarters. Morrison himself in handcuffs, being led to a federal vehicle while reporters shouted questions he ignored. The local news anchor provided details that filled in pieces I hadn't known. David Morrison, 43, owner of Morrison Development Group, was arrested today on federal fraud charges. The FBI alleges Morrison and associates systematically defrauded homebuyers across 4 states, inflating property values and concealing structural defects through bribed inspectors. But the most revealing moment came in a phone call Sarah didn't know I could hear. She'd been in our bedroom, presumably calling Morrison to warn him about the FBI investigation, not realizing the raids had already begun. David? David, thank God. The FBI contacted Michael. They know everything. We need to what? What do you mean you're in custody? There was a long silence as she processed whatever Morrison was telling her. You what? Her voice rose to a shriek. You told them it was all my idea? You said I forced you to David. We're partners. We're supposed to be in this together. Another pause. Then Sarah's voice became pleading, desperate. Don't do this to me. You said you loved me. You promised we'd build a life together. You can't just... The line went dead. Morrison had hung up on her, cutting the final thread that connected them. In federal custody, facing his own decades in prison, he'd chosen to save himself by throwing Sarah completely under the bus. I found Sarah on our bedroom floor an hour later, sobbing with the kind of raw despair I'd never seen before. Her phone lay beside her, and she was clutching a pillow like a life preserver. He's gone, she said without looking up. David told them everything was my idea. He said I seduced him into the fraud, that he was an innocent businessman corrupted by a manipulative woman. The irony was almost too perfect. The man Sarah had trusted with her future, her partner in crime and infidelity, had betrayed her exactly the way she'd betrayed me. Morrison had used her and discarded her the moment it served his interests. Sarah, I said quietly, you need to call a criminal defense attorney. Tonight. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Why are you helping me? I destroyed our marriage. I lied to you for years. I was going to leave you and take the children. Because Emma and Jake need at least one parent who isn't in federal prison, I said honestly. And because despite everything you've done, I still remember the woman I thought I married. But even as I offered help, I knew the truth. Sarah's choices had set in motion consequences that no attorney could fully mitigate. The evidence was overwhelming. The victims were real. And the federal government had built a case that would likely send her to prison regardless of Morrison's betrayal. The woman who'd thought she was so clever, manipulating everyone around her while building her secret empire, had finally encountered someone more ruthless and calculating than herself. The hardest conversation of my life took place on a Saturday morning in our living room, with Emma and Jake sitting on the couch, while I tried to find age-appropriate ways to explain that their mother was facing federal criminal charges. Emma, with her 12-year-old wisdom, had already figured out more than I'd realized. Mom's in trouble with the police, isn't she? That's why those news trucks were parked outside yesterday. Jake, at 9, was more confused than frightened. Did Mom do something bad, Dad? Yes, I said, choosing honesty over comfortable lies. Mom made some very poor choices that hurt other families. She took money that didn't belong to her and lied about it for a long time. Is she going to jail? Emma's voice was steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I don't know yet, sweetheart. That's for judges and lawyers to decide. But I want you both to understand something very important. None of this is your fault. Mom's choices have nothing to do with how much she loves you or what kind of people you are. The family therapy sessions began the following week. Dr. Patricia Valdez specialized in helping children cope with parental criminal activity, a field I'd never imagined I'd need to understand. Children often blame themselves when a parent faces legal trouble, she explained. During our first session, they think if they'd been better kids, or if they'd somehow prevented the bad choices, none of this would have happened. Emma's initial sessions revealed the emotional burden she'd been carrying. I kept noticing things that didn't make sense, she told Dr. Valdez. Mom's new clothes, her different phone, the way she acted when Dad wasn't home. I thought if I was a better daughter, if I helped more around the house, maybe she'd stop being secretive. Jake's processing was different, more focused on concrete concerns. Will Mom still be able to come to my art show next month? Will she still help me with my science project? The routine disruption was hardest on him. Sarah had always been the parent who managed school events, doctor appointments, and extracurricular activities. Now I was learning to navigate parent-teacher conferences, soccer carpools, and piano recitals while also dealing with lawyers, FBI agents, and divorce proceedings. But something unexpected began to happen in those first few weeks. Without Sarah's constant anxiety about money, without her secretive phone calls and mysterious absences, our home became calmer, more peaceful. Emma started bringing friends over again, something she'd stopped doing months earlier without my realizing it. I was embarrassed, she admitted later. Mom was always stressed and snappy when people came over. I didn't want my friends to see her acting weird. Jake's art became more vibrant, more joyful. His teacher, Mrs. Peterson, commented on the change during a parent conference. Whatever adjustments you've made at home, they're having a positive effect. Jake seems more relaxed, more creative. The truth was hard to accept. Our family was functioning better without Sarah's toxic influence. During one particularly honest family therapy session, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. Dad, do you still love Mom? Dr. Valdez had prepared me for this moment, helping me understand that children need authentic emotional responses, not protective platitudes. I love the person I thought your mum was, I said carefully. I love the woman who read you bedtime stories and taught you to ride bikes and celebrated your achievements. But the person who lied to our family and hurt other families, I don't know who that person is. Is it okay if I'm angry at her? Emma asked. It's okay to feel however you feel, I assured her. Anger, sadness, confusion, even love. All of those feelings can exist at the same time. Jake, with his 9-year-old directness, offered his own perspective. I think Mom forgot how to make good choices. Maybe she can learn again. His innocent optimism broke my heart and gave me hope simultaneously. Despite everything Sarah had done, our children still possessed the capacity for forgiveness and growth that she seemed to have lost. 3 weeks into our new routine, I found a note Emma had left on my desk. Dad, I know this is hard for you too. Thank you for telling us the truth even when it's scary. Thank you for taking care of us. I think we're going to be okay. Reading those words, I realized Emma was right. We were going to be okay. Not because the situation was easy, but because we were facing it together, with honesty, professional help, and the kind of love that doesn't require lies to sustain it. As Sarah's legal situation deteriorated, so did her mental state. The federal charges were only the beginning. Individual families were filing civil lawsuits. Her real estate license had been suspended, and the media attention was making it impossible for her to find employment anywhere in the area. But the most desperate phase began 3 weeks after Morrison's arrest, when Sarah realized that her former lover had not only betrayed her to federal investigators, but had also been lying about his own financial situation, Morrison's assets, the luxury lifestyle she'd been promised to share turned out to be largely financed through fraudulent loans and inflated property values. When federal investigators froze his accounts and seized his properties, there was nothing left of the empire Sarah thought she'd been building her future around. The voicemails started coming at all hours. My phone would ring at 6 a.m., midnight, 3 a.m., with Sarah's increasingly frantic messages. Michael, please call me back. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I'll give up everything, the money, the other man, everything. I just want our family back. Then, a few hours later, you can't keep the children from me forever. I'm their mother. I have rights and I'll fight for them. By the 3rd day, this is all your fault, Michael. If you hadn't been so boring, so predictable, I never would have needed someone else. You drove me to this. And finally, in a message that genuinely frightened me, I won't let you win. I won't let you destroy me. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Jennifer Walsh advised me to document every contact, save every voicemail, and report any threats to the police. Desperate people make desperate choices, she warned. Your wife is facing the complete destruction of her life. That makes her unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The desperation reached its peak when Sarah attempted to turn my own family against me. She called my mother, my brother, even my elderly aunt, spinning elaborate stories about my mental breakdown and claiming I was keeping the children from their mother out of spite. The conversation with my mother was particularly painful. She called me on a Thursday evening, her voice heavy with concern. Michael, sweetheart, Sarah called me today. She's very worried about you. She says you've been acting paranoid, making wild accusations about her business dealings. She thinks you might need professional help. I had to walk my own mother through the evidence, the bank statements, the FBI investigation, the federal charges. Watching her process the truth about the woman she'd welcomed as a daughter-in-law was heartbreaking. "Oh, Michael," she said finally. "I'm so sorry. I should have known Sarah wouldn't call unless she was manipulating the situation." But Sarah's most desperate attempt came when she approached Emma directly. "I discovered this violation of our custody agreement purely by accident when I found Emma crying in her room after school. Mom came to see me during lunch recess," Emma confessed through tears. "She was waiting by the fence behind the playground. She said you'd been telling lies about her and that she might have to go away for a while, and she wanted me to know that everything she did was to give me and Jake a better life." My hands shook with rage. Sarah had violated a court order, manipulated our 12-year-old daughter, and attempted to plant seeds of doubt about my honesty, all while facing federal fraud charges. "What did you tell her, honey?" Emma looked up at me with eyes that seemed far too old for her age. "I told her that you've never lied to me, Dad, and that if she really wanted to give us a better life, she wouldn't have done things that made us ashamed to be her children." The wisdom and strength in my daughter's response both broke my heart and filled me with pride. Sarah had underestimated the intelligence of her own children, assuming she could manipulate them the same way she'd manipulated everyone else. But her violation of the custody order gave us the legal ammunition we needed. Jennifer Walsh filed an emergency motion for complete supervised visitation, citing Sarah's increasingly erratic behavior and her willingness to involve the children inappropriately in adult legal matters. That weekend, Sarah made her final, most desperate play. She appeared on our doorstep with suitcases, claiming she'd been evicted from her apartment and had nowhere else to go. "Please, Michael, I know I don't deserve it, but I need help. I'm facing 20 years in prison. I just want to spend whatever time I have left with Emma and Jake." Looking at her, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, the expensive jewelry long since sold to pay legal fees, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity, but pity wasn't enough to override my responsibility to protect our children from further manipulation and emotional damage. "Sarah, you can't stay here. You know that violates the custody agreement. If you need help, call your lawyer or your family." Her face hardened as she realized her last manipulation had failed. "This isn't over, Michael. I'll find a way to make you pay for destroying my life." But even as she made the threat, we both knew the truth. Sarah had destroyed her own life through choices no one had forced her to make. I was just the person who'd refused to let her destroy ours as well. The divorce hearing took place on a cold December morning in Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom, a name that carried bitter irony given everything David Morrison had put our family through. Sarah sat at the defendant's table with her court-appointed attorney, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The federal case had moved swiftly once Morrison began cooperating with prosecutors. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he'd provided detailed testimony about the fraud operation, confirming every aspect of the evidence I'd compiled. Sarah's own attorney had advised her to accept a plea bargain, 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5.5 years. "Your Honor," Jennifer Walsh addressed the court, "we're seeking full custody of the minor children, Emma Carter, age 12, and Jake Carter, age 9. The defendant's criminal activities, combined with her demonstrated willingness to abandon the family for personal gain, make supervised visitation the only appropriate arrangement." Sarah's attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Robert Chen, made a half-hearted argument for shared custody, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hidden assets, the fraudulent business practices, the affair, and most damaging of all, the exit plan document detailing Sarah's strategy to disappear with Morrison while making me appear unfit as a parent. Judge Morrison, no relation to David, thankfully reviewed the case file with the thoroughness that had earned her reputation as one of the state's most respected family court judges. "Mrs. Carter," she said, addressing Sarah directly, "you've pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges that victimized multiple families. You concealed substantial assets from your husband while forcing your family to live under artificial financial constraints. You engaged in an extramarital affair with your criminal co-conspirator and made concrete plans to abandon your children. Is there anything you'd like to say before I render my decision?" Sarah stood slowly, and for a moment I thought she might finally show genuine remorse. Instead, she delivered a speech that demonstrated how little she'd learned from the consequences of her choices. "Your Honor, I made mistakes, but everything I did was motivated by love for my children. I wanted to provide them with opportunities my husband's limited income couldn't offer. Yes, I got involved with someone else, but that was because my marriage had become emotionally barren. I never intended to hurt anyone." The self-serving revision of history was breathtaking. Sarah had rewritten the entire narrative to cast herself as a loving mother, driven to desperate measures by an inadequate husband. Rather than acknowledging the systematic fraud and betrayal that had defined her actions, Judge Morrison wasn't impressed. "Mrs. Carter, your actions victimized 17 families, stealing over $800,000 from people who trusted you with the most important purchase of their lives. You maintained this criminal enterprise while lying to your husband and children about your activities and income. Your exit plan document shows premeditated intent to abandon your family while destroying your husband's reputation to gain custody leverage." She paused, consulting her notes. "The court finds that supervised visitation is appropriate, with visits limited to 4 hours per month in the presence of a court-appointed monitor. Mr. Carter is granted full legal and physical custody of both minor children." The financial resolution was equally decisive. The money I'd transferred to the Children's Educational Trust was confirmed as legally theirs. Sarah's remaining assets, what little hadn't been seized by federal authorities or consumed by legal fees, would be split between restitution to her victims and child support obligations. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, "Mrs. Carter will be responsible for child support payments of $200 per month, beginning upon her release from federal custody. Given her criminal conviction and the circumstances of this case, no spousal support is awarded." Sarah's face went white as the full scope of her losses became clear. She'd lost her children, her freedom, her financial security, and any chance of the comfortable future she'd thought she was building with Morrison. But the moment that provided me with the most satisfaction came when Jennifer Walsh presented the final financial accounting to the court. The Educational Trust now contained $387,000, not just from Sarah's hidden accounts, but from the liquidation of assets federal investigators had recovered. "Your Honor," Walsh said, "the Children's Educational Trust has been structured to provide for college tuition, graduate school if desired, and seed money for their adult financial security. Money that was stolen from other families' children will now secure these children's legitimate futures." As we left the courthouse that afternoon, Emma and Jake walked beside me with a dignity that made me proud. They understood that their mother would be going to prison, that our family as they'd known it was ending, but they also understood that truth and consequences were sometimes necessary for healing to begin. The divorce decree in my briefcase represented more than the end of my marriage. It was the legal validation that protecting my children from their mother's toxic choices had been the right decision, no matter how difficult. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Emma, Jake, and I stood in the driveway of our new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a different school district, far from the memories and media attention that had surrounded our old neighborhood. The move had been therapeutic for all of us. Emma had embraced the fresh start, making new friends who knew nothing about our family's legal drama. Jake had joined the art club at his new school and was thriving under a teacher who recognized his creative talents. Most importantly, we'd established new routines built on honesty, stability, and genuine affection, rather than the performance and manipulation that had defined our previous life. The $387,000 educational trust had grown to over $420,000 through careful investment management. Emma, now 13 and remarkably mature, understood that the money represented her and Jake's college futures, a positive outcome from a very dark chapter. "Dad," she said one evening while we prepared dinner together, "I know this is weird to say, but I think we're happier now. Is that okay to feel?" "It's more than okay," I assured her. "It means we've built something real together." Sarah's supervised visits had become a monthly ritual we'd all learned to navigate. She was serving her sentence at a minimum security federal facility 3 hours away, and the 4-hour visits with a court-appointed supervisor were awkward but manageable. The woman who showed up for those visits bore little resemblance to the Sarah I'd married or even the calculating criminal I'd discovered. Federal prison had stripped away her pretenses, her manipulation tactics, her carefully constructed persona. What remained was someone trying to figure out how to relate to children who'd grown up significantly in her absence. "I'm sorry," she told Emma and Jake during one recent visit. "I know that word doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I never meant for my choices to hurt you." Emma had responded with a maturity that astounded me. "We forgive you, Mom, but forgiveness doesn't mean we forget. You made choices that hurt a lot of people, including us. We're learning to be happy without those choices affecting our lives anymore." Jake, now 10, had been more direct. "I still love you, Mom, but I like living with Dad. He doesn't lie to us." Sarah had cried during that visit, not the manipulative tears I'd seen during our marriage crisis, but genuine grief for what she'd lost through her own actions. The most surprising development had been my return to dating. I hadn't planned it. 6 months after the divorce, romance was the furthest thing from my mind. But Emma's art teacher, Lisa Martinez, had begun staying after school events to chat, and eventually those conversations had turned into coffee meetings, then dinner dates. Lisa knew our story, the basics. Anyway, and her response had been refreshingly straightforward. "You protected your children from a toxic situation. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." She was divorced herself, with no children but a deep appreciation for the challenges of single parenting. More importantly, Emma and Jake genuinely liked her. She treated them with respect, never tried to replace their mother, and brought a lightness to our home that we'd all forgotten was possible. "Are you going to marry Miss Martinez?" Jake asked one day with his characteristic directness. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "Right now we're just enjoying getting to know each other. But would that bother you if it happened someday?" "As long as she doesn't lie to us," he said seriously, "and as long as she likes my art." Emma's perspective was more nuanced. "I think it would be good for you to have someone who makes you happy. Dad, you've been taking care of us for so long. You deserve someone to take care of you too." The educational trust statements arrived quarterly, showing steady growth that would ensure both children could pursue whatever educational paths they chose. Emma had expressed interest in law, perhaps inspired by watching Jennifer Walsh fight for our family's rights. Jake remained focused on art, but was also showing aptitude for mathematics, a combination that might lead him toward architectural studies. Looking at our family's new foundation, I realized we'd accomplished something remarkable. We'd taken the wreckage of Sarah's betrayal and built something stronger, more honest, and more loving than what we'd had before. The money she'd stolen from other families was now securing our children's legitimate futures. The lies she'd told had been replaced by truth, even when that truth was difficult. The instability she'd created through her criminal activities had been replaced by routines built on trust and mutual respect. 6 months earlier, I'd thought my marriage ending would destroy our family. Instead, it had revealed that our real family, Emma, Jake, and I, was strong enough to survive any crisis as long as we faced it together with honesty and love. 1 year after discovering that hidden bank statement, I sat in my home office, a different office in our new house, surrounded by family photos that told the story of who we'd become, rather than who we'd pretended to be. Emma had just left for high school orientation, confident and articulate as she prepared for freshman year. Jake was in the living room, working on a watercolor painting of the garden Lisa had helped us plant. The thank you letter had arrived that morning, written in Emma's careful handwriting on her personal stationery. "Dad, I wanted to write this down because sometimes it's easier to say important things in a letter. This year has been the hardest and best year of my life. Hard because we learned that Mum wasn't who we thought she was, and that families can be broken by lies and bad choices. Best because we learned that real families, families built on truth and love, can survive anything. Thank you for protecting Jake and me, even when it meant making difficult decisions. Thank you for being honest with us, even when the truth was scary. Thank you for showing us that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. I know you probably feel guilty sometimes about how everything happened, but I need you to know, you saved us. You saved us from growing up thinking that lies and manipulation were normal. You saved us from a future built on money stolen from other families. Most importantly, you saved us from learning too late that love without honesty isn't really love at all. I'm proud to be your daughter. And I'm proud of the family we've built together. Love always. Emma P.S. Jake wants me to tell you that he's happy too, and that his art is better now because he's not worried all the time." Reading those words, I felt a sense of completion, that had been missing throughout this entire ordeal. Emma understood, really understood, not just what had happened, but why the difficult choices I'd made had been necessary. Sarah's situation had stabilized somewhat. The federal facility where she was serving her sentence offered educational and counseling programs, and according to her letters, she was finally beginning to understand the scope of damage her choices had caused. Her supervised visits with the children continued monthly, but they'd evolved into something more honest and less painful for everyone involved. "I'm learning to take responsibility for my actions," she'd written in her last letter to me. "Not just the legal responsibility, but the moral responsibility for how my choices affected innocent people, including our children. I know I can't undo the damage, but I'm trying to become someone worthy of Emma and Jake's eventual forgiveness." The 17 families Sarah and Morrison had defrauded were slowly recovering. The restitution payments, combined with the civil lawsuit settlements, had helped offset some of the financial damage. More importantly, the FBI's investigation had led to stronger oversight of real estate transactions and inspector certifications, making it harder for future fraudsters to operate similar schemes. David Morrison had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison after his cooperation with prosecutors was deemed insufficient to warrant the reduced sentence he'd hoped for. According to news reports, his wife had divorced him and moved across the country with their children, a reminder that Sarah and I hadn't been his only victims. The educational trust had continued, growing and now contained nearly $480,000. Emma's law school dreams were fully funded, and Jake's artistic pursuits, whatever form they eventually took, would be supported without financial stress. Money that had been stolen from other families, children was now securing our children's futures in ways that honored rather than exploited trust. My relationship with Lisa had deepened into something genuine and lasting. We'd discussed marriage but weren't rushing into anything. Both our children were comfortable with the relationship, and more importantly, it was built on the kind of honesty and transparency I'd learned were essential for real partnership. "You know what I admire most about you?" Lisa had said recently. "You could have been bitter about Sarah's betrayal, could have let it poison your ability to trust anyone. Instead, you chose to protect what mattered most and build something better." As I reflected on the past year, I realized the most important lesson wasn't about marriage or money or even justice. It was about the difference between appearance and reality. For years, I'd been living in a marriage that looked successful from the outside but was built on fundamental deception. Now I was living a life that might seem more complicated to outsiders, but was built on truth, even when that truth was difficult. Emma and Jake had learned this lesson too. They'd discovered that real security comes from knowing the people you love will be honest with you, even when that honesty is painful. They'd learned that genuine love requires authenticity, not performance. If I could offer advice to anyone facing a similar betrayal, it would be this: trust your instincts, seek the truth even when you're afraid of what you'll find, and remember that protecting the innocent, especially your children sometimes, requires making choices that feel impossible in the moment but prove necessary in the long run. The woman I thought I'd married never really existed. The life I thought we were building was an elaborate fiction, but the family Emma, Jake, and I built from the wreckage of those lies. That family is real, honest, and stronger than anything Sarah's deception could have destroyed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's lies, even when that someone is the person you once trusted most. Truth has consequences, but so do lies. I chose to face the consequences of truth, and in doing so, gave my children the gift of authenticity in a world that too often rewards deception. Looking at our new life, honest, stable, built on genuine affection rather than manipulation, I wouldn't change the painful journey that brought us here. Some secrets are too destructive to keep, and some betrayals too deep to ignore. When you find the courage to act on that knowledge, you discover that truth, however difficult, really can set you free.